Welcome to this month's episode of the Deepdale podcast, our North Norfolk magazine programme. I'm Jason, it's June 2026, and in this episode I'm joined by Nick Acheson, aka the Marsh Tit. We had a great chat in the gorgeous surroundings of a North Norfolk wood, discovering more about Nick's passion for the natural world. And big thanks to Ollie from One Stop Nature Shop for his wildlife update. June could well be one of our favourite months in North Norfolk, although it has a lot of competition. The long days, some of the best weather, and you get to enjoy the incredible coastline, all without the crowds of the summer holidays. Norfolk Wildlife Trust, for which Nick is a wonderful ambassador, encourage you to enjoy 30 days wild during June. See their website for inspiration to interact with nature daily. And to help you explore the great outdoors of this beautiful part of the world, we've published our Guide to the North Norfolk Beaches, which joins our guides to cycling, stargazing, walking, water sports and wildlife watching. And here are some suggestions of upcoming events we'd recommend. You can see loads more on our website at deepdalecamping.co.uk/events. The Wild Yoga Garden opens its doors for wellbeing and yoga events on the Orchard at Dalgate Market. The Pantaloons return to Burnham Deepdale with their hilarious open-air theatre. The Almost Complete History of Britain on Saturday the 27th of June and Twelfth Night on Friday the 21st of August. Sarah McQuaid plays a gig in our Brick Barn on Saturday the 11th of July, part of the Deepdale live music. The pop-up shops continue at Dalgate Market with lots of great artisans and producers. The Jolly Sailors host their annual A Jolly Ale and Music Festival on Friday the 12th to Sunday the 14th of June. And on the 2nd of July, Whiten 26, an amazing exhibition of contemporary art, opens its doors. There are Nelson's Village tours, markets, runs, wildlife events, craft events, exhibitions and much more, all on our website at deepdalecamping.co.uk/events. Enjoy the listen. Nick is a fascinating, passionate guy, and if you do enjoy the listen, please leave a review on your favourite podcast app or directory. You can find an ever-growing back catalogue of episodes with a whole host of interesting guests who love North Norfolk and know so much about this beautiful part of the world. Please let your friends and family know all about our little slice of North Norfolk life.
Skies all open wide, geese go high and over. Oh, now you're a beachcomber, a fistful of sandfire, sea, lavender, see you next year.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of what's going on in the world of wildlife in North Norfolk. My name is Ollie from the One Stop Nature Shop. As we enter summer, the majority, or in fact all of the spring migratory birds have now arrived and have set up their breeding territories. Birds such as the hedgerow, such as lesser whitethroat, common whitethroat, blackcap, chiffchaff, willow warbler can all be heard singing. In the marshes, you might come across birds such as sedge warbler or reed warbler, and also on the marshes as well, there's going to be good numbers of spoonbills who seem to be having another successful breeding year over at Holcombe. As well as this time of year where the bird life gets a little bit slower because the migration is now finished, you might also now start to see more species of butterflies and dragonflies, especially when we do get some warmer weather. So make sure you check out freshwater areas for those, for the dragonflies, and hedgerows, etc. for the butterflies. As we enter into July, will be start of the peak of the orchid season, so those interested in flowers, definitely keep an eye out for orchids in suitable habitats. Certainly around Holme Nature Reserve is a very good area to see several species. If you want any of the latest bird news, do pop by the shop. We have the board outside the shop updated every single day. And also feel free to pop in for any information you might need on binoculars, telescopes, trail cameras, microscopes. We've also got books, bird feeders, magnifiers, basically everything you need for watching wildlife. That's it from me once again, and I hope to speak to you and see you all soon.
So I am standing in a beautiful North Norfolk wood, and I am with a man who gets incredibly passionate about the wildlife that you would find in such wood, Nick Acheson. And he is a huge advocate for wildlife, for Norfolk. He loves what's around us right now, the trees, the wildlife, the animals that are creeping around, even the tiny little creepy crawlies that we can find in the bark that's lying on the tree next to us. Welcome to Deepdale Podcast, Nick, and thank you for joining me. It's really kind of you. We've met in many different ways and forms over the years, and it is lovely to have you on here.
Thank you very much indeed, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here, though I confess standing in a wood was a mistake because my mind is over there with the song thrush who's singing, and as you say, looking out at the trees and identifying all the plants around us, and so I probably won't be very focused.
So we can hear, you might just about be able to hear kind of car noise in the background, which is the busy road kind of near Fakenham. But it's amazing how wildlife finds these glorious pockets and doesn't really give a damn what humans are doing next door. It just sort of kind of gets on with it.
That's true. It's true for a lot of species. It depends on how much space, and that's really why in all the conservation organisations in which I'm involved, what we're trying to do is spread out, connect, make sure that the places where wildlife still persists, where wildlife is thriving, have connection across landscapes. So they have space to move, individual animals move, but also their genes move and flow through landscape, so that we recover something of what we've lost across the landscape.
Yeah, I know that my sisters are heavily involved with the North Norfolk Coastal Group, and it's kind of trying to link up the wildlife areas of each of the farms and try and create these massive long corridors. And it looks like most of the North Norfolk coast now is beginning to kind of come into that in many ways with all the different really interesting farms. It
really is, and so it's fantastic that farmers are buying into the idea of a connected landscape, because of course across the north of Norfolk, the extreme north of Norfolk, the first few hundred metres, you've essentially just got nature reserves, National Trust nature reserves, Norfolk Wildlife Trust nature reserves, RSPB nature reserves, and some private land. But now all of the wonderful farmers who are just inland of the road are going, hang on, we're part of this too. We're part of this ecosystem, this landscape, and the biodiversity that we have on our farms adds to all of the diversity of the landscape and is just as important. And of course the big report that was done with UEA, with David Lars, etc. a few years ago has led to that mentality of, whoa, we're the custodians here of something really, really special. It's a joy to see.
And what got you excited? What made you first kind of go, oh my word, I'm really interested in that bird song or that nature aspect? What was it? Can you remember the moment the spark hit?
I don't remember a spark. I think as soon as I hatched from the egg, I was interested. I grew up just half a mile from here and used to escape to a Second World War airfield and just play outdoors, and was always enchanted by birds, by flowers, by insects, by trees, and was always wanting to learn, and then fell in with a number of biology teachers who themselves were nature people, who saw that I was really fascinated and helped me learn and grow, and so I'm deeply indebted to them.
You've had a fascinating career, kind of lots of different things. What do you most enjoy from that range of things you do? Because you've written books and you're on TV and you're on radio shows and you're on all sorts of other things. And I'm just, is there something that particularly you enjoy most?
I don't think there is. I love nature. I love nature in a way that I wouldn't know how to exist without it. I was up at 4:30 this morning. I was out of the door by 4:45. I was walking across the common onto the riverbank and then through the woods, etc. And that's how I That's how I find who I am every day. And I walk for 2 hours at dawn every day just to remember who I am before the day's work. And everything stems from that. And so I've been given this thing, which is communicating about nature in the written word, in the spoken word, in all sorts of different ways. And I love it all. I really do. I feel so privileged to do these things on behalf of creatures that don't have a human voice. Of course, they're all blissfully unaware. We're standing by a hazel bush with, actually hazel above us as well, and all sorts of other things growing in the woods around us. And they, in one sense, are completely unaware of us, and in another sense are utterly vulnerable in the context of everything we do and are doing. And like so many conservationists I know, I feel a real responsibility to be their voice, to stand up for them.
They're probably all like your small children, but do you have a favourite thing in nature that you are so glad when you hear it or see it, or it grabs you?
That's such a fine question. There are millions of them, and really millions of them. I think that the ultimate answer is a bird called a hobby that you have over the marshes at Deepdale, that has become more common in my lifetime in Norfolk. It's a little falcon that hunts swallows and dragonflies and is super fast and sharp, and it's just got all the panache of a peregrine, but it's pared down into this sharp, beautiful creature, and it's just thrilling to see. And when they first arrive in the spring, the first hobby I see, I feel my heart jump. And I have a really beautiful story about them. I've loved them my whole life, and I couldn't really choose a favourite bird, but can you hear the baby great tits over there begging for food from their parents? That's the second brood of baby great tits I've heard this spring. I've loved hobbies my whole life, and a few months ago, through a project that doubtless we'll talk about it on Massingham Heath, Ollie Birbeck's restored farm, my wonderful friend Harriet Mead, who's a sculptor, kept needling me to find out my favourite bird, and I thought nothing really of it. And then she made a sculpture of a hobby, and it was appearing at various exhibitions we were doing to do with the project we'll talk about. And I kept saying, oh my God, that thing is so, so beautiful, so beautiful. And then she said, my father said to me, I want to meet your friend Harriet. I want to commission some work from her. And I thought nothing of it and arranged to take him to meet Harriet. And it turned out that he'd commissioned Harriet to make this sculpture of a hobby for me. My dear beloved friend Harriet, who's one of my favourite artists, and my dad had commissioned this piece of my favourite bird, and I was knocked for six. And it sits on a sort of plinth beyond the end of my bed, and I look at it when I wake up every day. And I suppose I would have to say a hobby, both because the bird is thrilling, but because that story reinforces my love of hobbies and what they mean.
I saw you in Aylsham a few months ago, didn't we? And this was where we sort of started chatting about you coming on the podcast. And you were talking about your new book, which is celebrating Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Tell me a little bit more about how that book came about and your kind of relationship with Norfolk Wildlife Trust.
I've been a member since I was first a member in the 80s at some point. There's a wren singing right behind you there. Furious and angry and Rossini-like, fast and whirring and strident. So I was a member of Norfolk Wildlife Trust from childhood, from the 80s until I moved away to live in South America, where I lived for 10 years. And when I came back, I came straight into a job at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which is 18 years ago now. And ever since, in some way, I've been staff in various different roles, but all of them in some way communicating about nature and its beauty and importance. And I have written for the last dozen years a column in the Norfolk magazine, which has been a joy, but actually after writing a monthly column for 12 years, which has to be tied to what's going on in nature, after 12 years you're beginning to think, gosh, what am I going to write about this time?
September.
September, yeah. Exactly. And I'm writing now. We're now in June, aren't we? I've just submitted the one for August, and of course now I'm writing about September again. When we were starting planning the events for Norfolk Wildlife Trust Centenary, which was 2.5 months ago in March, I was asked, what can we do as a big product? And I thought, well, hang on, I've got 12 years worth of columns. Why don't we get someone to edit them into a book? There's no way an author himself or herself can do the editing, and you're too tied up in them and you can't make objective choices. So I took them to the wonderful Henry Late of the Book Hive, both in Aylsham and in Norwich, who of course is a wonderful mover and shaker in the art scene in Norfolk, and is so dynamic in sharing the arts in Norfolk. I mean, just an absolute a genius for sharing his passion for the arts. And I said to him, Henry, do you fancy editing this? And he just looked at me and said, yes. And lo and behold, he spent months trawling through these articles and made a selection of 60 of the articles, and it became a book, which is a partnership between the Book Hive, Propolis, which is his imprint at the Book Hive, and Norfolk Wildlife Trust. And it launched for the centenary at the start of March, and that was the book you came to hear me talking about with the wonderful Nick Crane, who lives in the Broads.
So what projects are filling your time now? Because I have a feeling you have quite a lot of things on a burner at any one time. But what would you describe as your sort of key projects right at the moment?
Goodness me. So 2 things that I'm doing today, I would say. I've just finished another book, which is a partnership with the Society of Wildlife Artists. Ollie Birbeck, who, like Henry Late, actually, is a school friend of mine. It's a small world, North Norfolk, as everyone knows. Ollie and I were together at school when we were quite young, and Henry later on. Ollie has restored 900 acres of land on his estate completely to wildlife, and then the rest of it has gone into regenerative, much like your land at Deepdale. Through a series of connections and coincidences, the Society of Wildlife Artists, Harriet Mead, the sculptor who made my hobby, she was taken there, and she thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a residence here where artists come? And the project started growing and growing and became a book. And Harriet asked me if I would write it, which has been the most enormous honour. For the last year, from May last year to April this year, artists have come through the year. In total, 34 artists have visited, wow. And all of them have produced work documenting the restoration of the land, documenting the regenerative farming, documenting the wildlife that's moved back in, documenting the livestock on the farm, the crops on the farm, and it has just been the most magical thing. And they've told me their stories and their impressions, and I've obviously spent thousands of hours there watching the wildlife as well. And that book comes out in September, so that... I sent the last chapter this morning, and then I've spoken to Harriet about various book events and things this morning. And then this evening, I have a Deepdale-related meeting, an online meeting, because your neighbour, Andrew Crean, founded a charity where I'm a trustee, yes. Deepdale Conservation Trust, where we both breed the corncrakes that are for reintroduction to the English landscape. We're now releasing them in Yorkshire, although we still have plans to continue releasing in Norfolk. And we also head start curlews, which come from East Anglian, largely RAF air bases, where the curlews lay alongside airstrips, and they are considered a danger to aviation, so the eggs have to be destroyed. And rather than the eggs be destroyed, we become mummy curlews, and we raise the curlews and release them back into the wild. And we have our monthly catch-up meeting and planning meeting this evening, so that's really my day. It's all very Norfolk stuff. Very Norfolk, very nature, very land restoration, very conservation, which is where I sit.
What took you to South America, bearing in mind you're a Norfolk boy and there's so much wildlife here? You know, I'm sure lots of us travel, but you know, what drew you over there?
That's a great question. It was 2 things really. The first was that my first degree, my undergraduate degree, was in modern languages and literature, and I lived in France for a year. But I manipulated it so that I lived in the south of France between La Crau and the Camargue, so that I would have access to wildlife. And I really fell in love with bigger landscapes, with wilder places. It was the first time, because Norfolk, much though we have this tremendous diversity of wildlife, is still very much a farmed landscape, very, very much a managed landscape. But there you have, the Camargue is a big functioning delta. And yes, there's rice farming within it, there's cattle grazing within it, but it is still a much wilder landscape. And my ears pricked up, and my eyes, my heart pricked up, and I became much more interested in the idea of more connected landscape. And then I did a master's degree following on from my undergraduate degree, and that was in nature conservation. Essentially, it was in environmental things. And it was during that an opportunity came up to go volunteer on a project in Bolivia. And I was a bit lost about where I was going to go, and not really in a particularly good place. And I went, and following the 3 months I was supposed to, I went for 3 months and I stayed for 10 years. Following the 3 months, it happens to everyone. And at the end of the 3 months, I was offered an opportunity to work, and then I kept being offered opportunities to work, and I did come back and finish my master's degree, and then I actually went and worked in Australia for a while, but then ended up back in Bolivia, and 10 years later I finally came home at another crossroads in life, and ever since I've had a wonderful relationship with Norfolk Wildlife Trust and with increasing numbers of organisations, and feel very, very privileged.
Now that you've kind of sent off your last chapter for the book about the artists and, that incredible reversion, is there another big project in looming, or are you deeply in one already?
There is a book, actually. There's a book. So it's what I would call a me book, because it's a while since I wrote a me book. The last two books, the Norfolk Wildlife Trust book and the Society of Wildlife Artists book, have been collaborative projects. They have been beautiful. They have been a joy to work on, and I wouldn't change a thing. But I actually have ideas for 3 big books, but I've decided which one I'm going with. But I can't talk about it. It's too fledgling. It's too much my idea that I'm working on. I've started putting out feelers and getting the information, the support that I need to tell the story that I need to tell, because a book has one person's name on the cover. A book sounds as if it's the product of one person's imagination and everything like that, but you couldn't possibly write a book without the support of an entire community of people. And for the book that I wrote about geese, which came out 3.5 years ago now, there are countless Norfolk people interviewed in it. There are countless people who read sections of it, who suggested books that I read, who spoke to me by Zoom in Iceland, who supported it. A book requires a village. It really does. Having grown up just over there, I grew up in Little Snoring, quarter of a mile from where my grandfather grew up. I mean, that's how it is around here. How long's the farm been in your family?
4 generations.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather bought the first bit of Deepdale farm.
Wow.
And then Grandad sort of doubled the land again, and then my father added to that.
Yeah.
And then I was the evil one that kind of reduced the size a bit with Dad. Yeah, now it sort of seems to be a sort of a relatively stable size, which I think my sisters are enjoying managing when DEFRA don't do anything really dumb, but we know about those, don't we?
On the subject of families and generations and houses also that don't really see the sea, my great grandfather, so 4 generations of my family are buried and were married in Blakeney Church, and my great-great-grandfather co-owned the last shipping company in 700 years of shipping from Blakeney. And he had a very, very big house right in the middle of Blakeney. If you look at Blakeney from a satellite map, there's a shocking great house in the middle, but you can't really see the sea from it. Yeah. And he built a mound in the garden so he could stand with his brass telescope and watch the ships coming home to the pit, bringing whatever it was that he'd paid to import from Iceland or wherever it was. Yeah, because again, he lived in a house in a coastal town which couldn't see the sea, so he had to build a mound.
I do find it, it is fascinating. Deepdale House is absolutely lovely, but and it has got some ancient woodland around it. So, there are good reasons for, I'm glad he didn't chop the ancient woodland down to get a sea view, but I am slightly surprised by the location of the house. But hey, there you go.
But talking to my father and his older sister, both well in their 80s now, growing up in Blakeney, they never went near the sea.
No.
They lived inland in the probably the posh end, and they were always on horses on farmland inland. And I know they never swam even in the sea. My aunt told me she learnt to swim in the swimming pool at the Blakeney Hotel. And you've got the sea there, why wouldn't you learn to swim in Blakeney Pit? Makes no sense at all. But for them, the sea, I suppose, they would be the last generation where the sea was a working thing, a dangerous thing, rather than a pleasurable thing.
Yeah. If you had to pick your top 3 places in Norfolk, and I know that that's a nigh on impossible, so you can cheat like most of my guests do, but you basically, if you had to pick your top 3 places in Norfolk and the reason why, what would you choose?
Gosh, that is so hard, because even just thinking with my Norfolk Wildlife Trust heart, there are so many reserves that I just love. The first one that comes to mind is Ringstead Down, which has been a Norfolk Wildlife Trust reserve for a long time. And in the northwest of Norfolk, the chalk is right at the surface, and there are very few places left where the ancient chalk grassland has not been destroyed. But Ringstead Down, by virtue of being so steep-sided, is still chalk grassland, original ancient chalk grassland, much like Warham Camp, for example. And Ringstead Down just fizzes with rare things. The flora there is exceptional, and because of the flora being so exceptional, all of the insects and everything else, and it's just this, it's so secret. You can drive past it. Mind you, I always get lost in Ringstead. Ringstead is an absolute maze of a place. I can never find my way through Ringstead. I never know where I'm going.
You do realise they took the signs down in case we got invaded by the Germans in World War II, and somebody forgot to put them back up again.
Well, I would like to declare I'm not a Nazi, and I go to Ringstead with good purposes. I go to try and find Ringstead Down. But Ringstead Down, you can drive past the entrance to it from both ends, because there's a through track, and you've just got no idea it's there. And it's this utterly un-Norfolk steep-sided valley, and we, Norfolk Wildlife Trust, have this little group of British white cattle grazing it, and they just look right in that landscape. They're beautiful, and they do the job that we need them to do to conserve the landscape. I mentioned Warham Camp, which I'm going to add in as a fourth one, because again, it's such a precious place. I mean, it's so extraordinary that we have this Icony Fort in North Norfolk that is almost completely preserved, that not only is it of archaeological importance, but because of the embankment built of chalk, the flora is just glorious, absolutely. And all the plants have names like Squinancy wort and rock rose and drop wort and large wild thyme, all these magical plants with magical names. So those two are my chalk grassland sites.
And so if people wanted to visit those, how would they find, say, Warham Camp?
Warham Camp is, well, the best thing to do is for app users, go on Google Earth or whatever and just look for 2 concentric circles just south of Warham on the road that goes from Whiten to Warham.
Yep.
And you just pull off by the road. There's a little track. It's owned by the Holcombe Estate, but managed both for its biological diversity by Holcombe Estate, but also for its archaeological importance by English Heritage. And it's just a glorious, glorious place. But you can't have a picnic there.
Okay.
Because there's a little plant called stemless thistle or dwarf thistle, which grows flat to the ground and is the spikiest thing you've ever seen. And there isn't a square inch of ground that doesn't have stemless thistle growing on it.
It's not the place
so
to sit.
Not the place to sit down. You need some seriously impermeable ground sheets in order to have a picnic at Warham Camp. So thinking of somewhere else. So if you wanted to visit Ringstead, I would go to the Norfolk Wildlife Trust website, which is norfolkwildlifetrust.org.uk, and there's a whole gazetteer of the reserves. My second site is also a Norfolk Wildlife Trust reserve. Of our ancient woods, the one I think I love the most is Foxley Wood, for a whole range of reasons. It's halfway between Fakenham, well, closer to Fakenham really, but on the road to Norwich, just near Bordswall. It's mentioned in the Domesday Book, so exactly, gives you credentials. So we know it's at least 1,000 years old. It's about 300 acres. But during the 1960s, it was essentially sprayed with Agent Orange, and most of the wood was destroyed, and then planted with non-native conifers, which were not suited at all to the heavy clayey soils of much of the wood. So they were spindly, weakling things. And Norfolk Wildlife Trust bought it in 1988, and over a period of years removed all of the conifers and gradually has restored the ancient flora. And there was a vicar in Ling, just south of the road, in the 1700s, who, as 1700s vicars very often didn't spend a lot of time thinking about God, spent a lot of time doing natural history in the woods.
I guess they would see that as being God-given.
It could well have been.
That would be their excuse.
That would be their excuse indeed. And it was God's creation. He kept a diary of all of the plants he saw in Foxley Wood in the 1700s. And we knew we'd restored the wood when every single plant he mentioned was found in the wood. Isn't that magical?
Wow.
Yeah. And we've just last year added another 100 acres of land, reaching up to Marriott's Way on the north side of Foxley Wood, meaning we can actually, for the first time in 1,000 years, because we know how big it was in Domesday, expanded the size of the wood, and we will allow the flora of the wood to spread back into a piece of land it hasn't occupied in centuries, which is just thrilling. It's the most wonderful place. Wonderful place.
What are you going for your third?
Oh, my goodness me. My brain is throbbing with thoughts. I've got so many. I think at the moment I'm going to circle back to Ollie Birbeck's farm in Massingham, so in Little Massingham. The heath, as it's called. Now, heath is a word that's usually used to describe acid soils, heathy, heathery sorts of places. And there are little outcrops of acid soils where there's a deep pile of sand left by an ice sheet. But essentially it's chalk landscape again. But the reason it's so precious is that having been chalk grassland since the felling of the wildwoods for thousands of years, probably 3,500, 4,000 years, it was ploughed up under Dig for Victory in the 1940s. And it's completely understandable why that happened. There was a national emergency to end all national emergencies. So the heath was ploughed up, and by the time Ollie inherited the land a decade ago, he came in as a non-farmer. He'd been in the military for decades. And he came in as a non-farmer, and he went, hang on a second, why are we pumping this land full of nitrates that cost us a fortune and pesticides that cost us a fortune, and we don't even break even on the crop that we're producing? Why are we doing this? This makes no objective sense. So he looked into ways to restore it, and happily he fell in with the right person at Natural England, an amazing guy called John Ebbidge, who's a real man of the land. He's a wonderful guy, and John advised him to work with a tenant farmer on the Sandringham estate called Ed Cross, who is one of my heroes. And Ed, he is the gold standard of landscape restoration. All of his seed mixes with which he sows sites to restore ancient grassland or heathland or whatever are hand gathered from ancient sites within a few kilometres of the recipient site. So we know they are the seeds of the plants that evolved in that landscape, that have lived there for thousands of years. And then he sows these mixes, and between them they came up with a grazing regime which would favour the propagation and spread of these plants. And there are now 900 acres of restored grassland, most of it chalky, some of it sandy, some of it very sandy and therefore slightly acidic, and it's just fabulous. And I've spent the last year there researching and writing this book, and so I've fallen head over heels with it.
And can you access that as the general public?
Parts of it, yes. Ollie is a person of enormous largesse, and his attitude, his Auntie Mary, from whom he inherited the estate, for whom he has nothing but praise. But he tells stories of her basically setting the gamekeepers and the dogs on anyone who had the temerity to set foot on the land. But Ollie's attitude is, come see this. This is what we can do.
Yeah.
And he loves sharing it. But there is a public footpath across parts of the heath, and Ollie is actually very flexible about people exploring.
We had the Open Farm Sunday last weekend at Deepdale, and there's nothing more enjoyable than seeing people realising what's happening within a landscape and the reasons for the landscape developing the way it does, and I think I don't organise that one. That's my sister's 100%. But when we used to do the sort of the walks around the farm kind of, and I used to take them and you standing and explaining, this is a beetle bank and we're doing this and these are the areas round the fields, and that allows the beetles to work their way across and hopefully they'll deal with the pests, and people are like, wow, and they're just so disconnected from the land, which is heartbreaking. And so anything that helps with that, I think, the better.
And it is heartbreaking is the word. It's heartbreaking for two reasons. One, because we are a creature of an environment. We are a creature of a landscape and of a habitat. We too, we're both, presumably you had lunch. We're recording just after lunch. I'm digesting my lunch. My lunch was grown in soil, watered by rain. It could only grow because of fungal mycelia and bacteria in the soil and the gentle light of the sun and all of those things. It can only exist. I am a creature of an ecosystem, and we can't survive without ecosystems, so we need healthy ecosystems, not just because I love the beech tree that's above us and the hazel trees that are around us and the hollies growing beside us and the sound of the wind in the trees above us. Those are the things that make me me, so they have a right to exist for that reason. But we also can't exist without them. So that's one reason it's heartbreaking that people are divorced from the land. The other is to do with our soul, our spirit. We evolved in a landscape. We've existed as a species for a couple of 100,000 years, and it's only really in the last 200 years that any of us anywhere on Earth have been divorced from daily personal interaction with soil, with rain, with wind, with sun, with flowers, with birds, with a need, a deep, both physical and spiritual need to understand the land. And suddenly we think it's all right to live off an iPhone or an iPad or a set of earpods or AirPods or God knows what they're called, and we think that's nourishing us as a species, and it bloody well isn't. And we need to rediscover, both for our own physical survival, because without the wild we can't exist, but also because we are a creature of it. It's where we evolved, it's where we belong, and we are so much healthier and happier with the sound of the wind in the trees as we can hear above us right now.
Yeah. So when was it in life that you realised that you could kind of look at this tree and you kind of knew what it was and probably how old it was? And is it just from years and years and years of spending time in nature and around people that knew more than you and just learning from them?
Yes, really that. But it's not that there's a finished point where you go, I know it now. I learn every day.
Yeah. Especially if you're reading, manuscripts from the 1700s, with about plants that you cannot find at the moment, and then you're restoring those and developing those. It must be a never-ending learning scale.
It is, and sadly, as one reaches a certain age, sadly, a 52-year-old brain, as mine now is, doesn't quite remember stuff as well as the 13-year-old brain who had the privilege of working with 3 biology teachers who were wonderful naturalists and who shared all of their knowledge. But I learn every day. I was out yesterday with a friend who works in conservation aviculture, who breeds birds in captivity for conservation. Last week I was out with Ed Cross, the farmer who restores landscapes, and every one of these people shares insight, shares knowledge. But to jump back to your question, there's never been a point where I've thought to myself, gosh, I know. But my whole life I've wanted to know. But my interest has changed, definitely. I used to be fixated. Birds are a gateway drug to biodiversity, and so birds were my first real passion. And I wanted to. I was upset that I'd never seen a stone curlew, or I'd never seen the migrating black terns or little gulls or whatever, and I was desperate to see them, and would doubtless have been bothering my parents to, oh, but there's one of these, please, 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 I need to go and see it. I'm not like that at all anymore. I don't have this burning need to see everything, but I do. We're standing in a wood that has a long history of human land use, and there's a coppice hazel right next to us, but it's a hazel that was last coppiced 100 years ago, and there's a story there. And then there's an oak the other side of us that's hundreds of years old, and that oak will have been planted for or allowed to grow for a completely different purpose. And then there would have been pigs run through the wood in the autumn for pannage to pick up the acorns. And my relationship now is with landscape and with all of the creatures that live in it, but also all of the people who live and have lived in it, and the stories of all those things together. And that's really what motivates me now. And I no longer need. I still love, when I see if a honey buzzard, as a honey buzzard once did over the road that perhaps you can hear in the background, that when I see a honey buzzard, I punch the air for the excitement of seeing a honey buzzard. But I'm no longer desperate to see a honey buzzard. But I just feel this deep sense of belonging in this landscape and feel unbelievably blessed to have that.
And do you feel positive about the future and nature? Oh. Or are you... do you feel that we've still got a lot of things to do and change?
I think the second option. I was actually writing I never write talks. All my talks I make up as I go along. But I was preparing the PowerPoint for a talk I'm giving in Lincoln on Saturday. I hope it's Saturday. I'm going on Saturday. A conference I'm speaking at in Lincoln on Saturday. And it is about finding hope because the truth is things are very, very, very dark. As you know, as a farmer who's devoted your farm to regenerative and organic agriculture, the state of the land is abysmal. Not only from the point of view of biodiversity, which, as we've mentioned before, is intrinsic to our own existence, but also because as we change the climate, and it's of course a vicious circle, because farming leads into changing climate, but then is affected by changing climate. And until this massive rain we've just had, people have been looking at their cereal crops and going, my barley's a bit thin, and now it'll get fat because we've had this lovely big rain. But had we not had this lovely big rain, then farmers would have been looking at a pretty poorly crop and a great loss of income. And so it's this cycle, and the landscape is in a very, very, very poor way. Aldo Leopold, who said side effect of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. The more you know, the more you can see has been destroyed or is being destroyed. And if one doesn't know, I was on a bus. I try to go everywhere by public transport if I can. I was on a bus to Norwich a couple of weeks ago, going across a well-known estate, and all of the farms, all of the fields were radiant with crimson clover, and they looked beautiful. And crimson clover is not harmful. It's sequestering nitrogen. It feeds certain common invertebrates. It's not a bad thing. But in the minds of most people, they would go, wow, that's so lovely, they're feeding the bees. And in my heart, I was going, but native plants could so much better do that job and could so much better feed the invertebrates that have co-evolved with those species in this landscape. And the trouble is, the more one has the privilege of knowing, the more one can see what's missing and what's been harmed and what's being harmed.
Yeah. I think a bit like you. I get very depressed if I look at the bigger picture. So I think for a long time at Deepdale we've tried to sort of create our own ecosystem, both from business point of view and pure environmental sort of side, because it was too depressing looking beyond that. We sort of created a place that people wanted to come and stay. People think, and the difference that happened at Deepdale Farm in just that first year of organic and stopping spraying was so wonderfully magical to see that change, that you realise that, I'm very aware that's from an amateur kind of understanding, and I'm very aware that people will look deeper and go, wow, we're missing this and we're missing that. But to see the change that could happen with just what was a relatively minor change, really, on a relatively small bit of land surrounded by an awful lot of other things, was just glorious to see. And I kind of hope, as I hear that places like China are going massively down the route of sort of solar and and wind and stuff, because they've seen how that works, and that Trump will hopefully never win the argument against sort of renewables, simply because businesses will go, well, kind of adds up for us, and best will in the world, unless you're going to tax it till the point where it doesn't, we're going to do it. So I'm hoping that sense will begin to prevail. As when Beijing gets full of sand because they've destroyed the environment locally, they have to make a change, or they have to abandon their capital city, which they don't want to do. So therefore they have to make the change. And once Trump has gone and his cronies hopefully have been washed away in that same whatever thing, then
metaphorically washed away. Yes. Nobody is advocating violence on the Deepdale podcast.
Absolutely not. But hopefully there will be a change of thought, because people will have looked at it and gone, well, that didn't work, and that's what I'm hoping, and I'm trying to be massively positive about, because I want my daughter to grow up in a world that isn't utterly stuffed. When he's standing in a wood like this and you're looking at the beauty of nature, I know it's very close to an urban centre, and it's got things, but it's got a sense that nature will take back if we let it. Then I think for me, I'm trying to stay on a sort of a positive route.
I think you're right, and there are lots of things in what you said about the ecosystem of Deepdale. It's not just a physical ecosystem, but also a psychological ecosystem, because if one sets out to do good in the world, it can be for Ukrainian refugees, it can be for any good that one can try to do. One has to focus on what's possible within the limits of one's own ability and scope. And so if you own a farm, you can make that farm better for people, for nature, for the environment, and that's on you. But you can't make everything better everywhere else in the world.
No.
And it's really important to stay hopeful. There's a book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Sonnet, an amazing US thinker, extraordinary woman. And I don't remember the exact words, but she says that hope's not a vague wish. Hope is a cudgel with which to hammer down the doors of opposition. Hope is an action. Hope is a doing thing. We have to hope. We have to decide to hope. Because the wren that just sang a second ago, the hazel, the old coppice hazel that's beside us and the ancient oak here, they're not going to survive just because we like them. We have to mean to protect them and give them more space in the landscape. And that requires tenacity. It requires commitment. It requires passion and vision. And all of that starts from a place of hope. And going back to my ancient French literature degree, in the Chanson de Roland, which is the oldest written story in French, written in about 1100, as the hero Roland knows he is about to die, he says "Malvé c'est simple n'en sera jamais," which is Old French for "I shall never be used as a bad example." And what he means is that even though I know this is a path of peril and I'm doomed, I have to stand up for what's right. I have to do the right thing. And it's quite a common trope in medieval literature, this idea of it's important to be on the right side. No matter what we lose, you don't waste your life trying to do good.
If people want to wander through woodland and stuff for the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, is membership a great way to do that? How does the support work for the Norfolk Wildlife Trust? I guess they make money out of the cafe at Cly, and certain places have car parking fees, don't they? But what's the best way to support nature in your local area, wherever you happen to be?
Great question. And the first answer is actually that of the 60 public nature reserves that Norfolk Wildlife Trust owns and or manages, almost all of them are free access, because Norfolk Wildlife Trust has this deep foundational commitment to making nature accessible to people, because we believe from the very roots that if people don't see nature, feel nature, touch nature, smell nature, they won't love nature and therefore want to protect nature. So people can visit almost all of the Norfolk Wildlife Trust reserves without needing to be a member. However, the best thing people can possibly do is join as a member. And there are various different ways of doing that, but you can find out about it at norfolkwildlifetrust.org.uk, or go to one of our visitor centres at Ranworth, at Hickling, at Home Dunes, or at Cly, and ask about membership. Because if you're a member, you're not just giving money, and we're grateful for the money, but you're also lending political support. Because we are part of an organisation, a mothership organisation called the Royal Society Wildlife Trust, which has 46 members across the country, and together we have 850,000 members. And politically, that is an important part of the population, and we're listened to because we come together as one voice to speak up on behalf of nature. So the more members we have, the better. Plus, of course, we have all kinds of ways of communicating with members, of sharing the message, and people might hear about a particular initiative and think, wow, that's totally up my street. That thing is in my village, or that thing is in my area of the county, or that thing is about hedgehogs, and hedgehog is my favourite animal and I really want to do something to help. And we ask for help in all manner of different ways. We ask for observations of species. We ask for donations for particular initiatives. We ask for people to take part in habitat management, or for people to consider leaving legacies in their wills, or whatever. And everybody who's a member, and we've now got, for the first time ever, 41,000 members, to each of whom we're profoundly grateful. Each person has the ability to make a difference in their own capacity. And this year, in our 100th year, we're saying to people, do one thing for nature. Find out what it is that you can do, whether you're 85 years old or 12 years old. There's something you have the power to do that makes the world better for nature, and therefore for all of us.
And June is, of course, 30 Days Wild.
It is.
Which I absolutely love. I think it's just a fabulous idea. Just try and do something wild every day. And there's lots of really good resources on the Norfolk Wildlife Trust and the Wildlife Trust's sort of national website, with lots of different ideas, and we've listed some on ours. And if someone is this city centre, they're limited access, we always welcome them to North Norfolk coast. But if they're not here during June, what would you suggest might be a good way of kind of connecting with nature if you're in that situation?
That's a great question, because yes, of course, huge numbers of people in Norfolk live in Thetford or in King's Lynn or in Great Yarmouth or in the middle of Norwich and don't have access to nature. But they do have access to nature. It's just that nobody's told them it's there for them. Nobody's told them this is your birthright. Wherever you are, I challenge everybody in society to go outdoors and not see plants growing in pavements. And you might use the word weed. I use the word weed flippantly a lot because I love weeds. I'm right next to us, there are bluebells, and if we walked just a few metres, I'm sure the bluebells are now well over, but I know this wood very well, and just at the top of this slope I could show you greater stitchwort and wood sorrel and all kinds of other wonderful ancient woodland plants.
And the holly that
keeps prickling us indeed. There are plants growing in every pavement in Norfolk, and if you lend them your attention, they can become friends. And these days, almost everyone will have a phone. And you can download an app, free, that will tell you who those plants are, or give you a jolly good idea. Yeah. And you can download an app that will also allow you to send records, making your observation valuable. Nature gets better and better the more we lend it attention. Including the blackbird who's singing behind you just over there, because now the wind and the rain have passed, the blackbird is going, oh, I think I'll have a little sing now and claim my territory. And my life is just incomparably richer for those creatures around me and the relationship I have with them. Everybody has a right to that. Everybody. And everybody can find it. There is a blackbird singing in the centre of Thetford, King's Lynn, Diss, you name it, Norwich. There's a blackbird singing everywhere. And once you learn the song of a blackbird, then when you hear the song of a robin when they start to sing again in August, you'll go, ooh, that one's different. Blackbirds sound happy and relaxed, and that one sounds a bit wistful. And then your life is richer every single day for that relationship. So the first thing I would say is notice. Lend me your ears and your eyes and your heart. And your fingers. Shove your fingers in the soil, because that's where we come from.
And if you're really stuck in the city, there are some fabulous people to follow online who talk about nature, teach you about nature, show the wildlife that's on your doorstep. You know, as you say, those amazing plants that are growing through the pavements, and the trees that are on your street, and the stuff that's growing from your neighbour's garden that they are not really aware of, and that sort of thing. Would be fabulous.
And that's something we learned during the strange time of the pandemic, that our community online can be just as powerful. There's nothing like actually touching the holly that's prickling my leg at the moment. However, you can still learn online. You can still find out and make a community of people who are passionate about nature. There are so many talented, creative, eloquent people talking about nature and the environment online. It's wonderful. But you can also get out. I'm thinking of Norfolk Wildlife Trust again. One of the things I'm most proud that we've done, and I've only been a tiny, tiny part of the work, but we raised the money to, along with Aviva, who were unbelievably generous to us and have match funded every pound that we've raised. We purchased Sweetbriar Marshes in Norwich, and anybody who lives in Norwich who can board a bus can get to Sweetbriar Marshes, and the main paths are wheelchair accessible. They have a special edge to the paths so that people who are partially sighted can feel their way along the paths. It really is a reserve that has been designed by people who have boundaries we might not consider to their access to nature, and that's been the foundational vision of that reserve, and it's something that thrills me. It really does, that we've got this reserve that is designed for everybody to be able to reach and enjoy and make their own.
And yeah, you think of all the parks that are in our cities all over the country. You know, the wildlife is there. It's just taking the time to sort of sit and watch and just let it kind of happen around you, isn't it? Really,
it really is. And I'm standing here listening to. There's a blackbird squeaking up there, and that's telling me that a sparrowhawk has flown over, because that's the flying predator alarm call of a blackbird. But that doesn't matter. I don't care. If you're never going to know. Did you hear that little squeak? That was the blackbird. I don't care if you're never, ever going to know that. If you go outside and see a street pigeon and you don't know what it is, but you're enchanted by the gorgeous green shimmer on its neck and the burbling call of the male, that's enough. It's more than enough, because that's that moment of connection, that moment of knowing we belong on a shared planet. and that we are custodians of the same place. It doesn't matter if you don't know the call of the jackdaw that just flew over, that nests in the ancient oaks, and the peacock that's calling somewhere on the next property. It doesn't matter if you don't know those things, because that's how I relate to nature. But not everyone does. Some people make tapestries inspired by nature. Some people paint inspired by nature. Some people make sound recordings inspired by nature. Some people go running in nature. Some people take their sled dogs through the woods. Some people grow organic food. All of that is a relationship with nature.
Yeah.
And all of it is equally valid. And can you hear the nuthatch singing just there?
So, final question for you. Okay, so this is a big debate that happened on Six Music quite a while back. It was, what are wood pigeons saying? And the general decision seemed to be, my toe hurts, Betty. So what do you think it is?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I need to start with what collared doves are saying. Collared doves are the health and safety operatives of the bird world, and they are worried about everyone's safety, and they constantly say, be careful, be careful, be careful. And you can tell that collared doves are deeply concerned about everyone's safety, because when they land on a bird table, they always go, woo, because they're relieved to have made a safe landing. Wood pigeons, though, are specifically concerned about your safety. And what they say is, careful, Jason, be careful, Jason, be careful, Jason. But then they decide they really couldn't care about your safety anymore, and the last note is always just, and that is what a wood pigeon is saying.
Okay. Well, I'll check in with the Six Music listeners and see what they say. But I think my toe hurts, Betty seemed to be a fairly popular one, and I hear it out the window of my office and go, oh my God, that's right. It's scary. But I will listen carefully for the health and safety messages. That'll be good. Excellent. So if people want to find your books, your columns, that's the thing. Where's the best places to sort of head?
It's all on my website, which is themarshtit.com. Themarshtit.com.
Excellent. And your books are for sale in the Book Hive, in both Aylsham and in Norwich. Norwich being the original one, of course.
They are indeed, and also at Norfolk Wildlife Trust visitor centres. And keep an eye out for the next book, the one with the Society of Wildlife Artists, which is called This Healing Heath, and it'll be out at the end of September. It's with the designer now, and it'll be available from the Society of Wildlife Artists, but also in quite a lot of Norfolk bookshops.
It's been an absolute pleasure to stand in a wood, amazingly without the rain that we had expected to soak us to the skin, and to hear your absolute passion for wildlife and for Norfolk generally. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening. Please do let your friends and family know about this North Norfolk podcast, and we'd love to hear your suggestions and submissions. Email podcast@deepdalepodcast.co.uk.
Skies all open wide, geese go high and over. Oh, now you're a beachcomber, fistful of samphire, sea, lavender, sea.